14 questions.
Welcome, everybody. How are we doing tonight? Go ahead, give yourselves a round of applause. I know we're all in our houses, but we can be loud. We wanted to start out by saying special thank you, of course, to the independent bookstores that were involved in tonight's evening. In The Unlikely Story in Plainville, Massachusetts, Brazo Bookstore in Houston, Texas, Little Shop of Stories in Decatur, Georgia, Quail Ridge Bookstore in Raleigh, North Carolina, and of course, Politics and Prose in Washington, D.C. Also want to say thanks to the good folks at Harper's Children for making this all happen. The two men that are in conversation this evening need no introduction, but I'm going to do it anyways. Just real quick, my name is Isaac Fitzgerald. I am your host this evening. It's such a pleasure to be here. I love pirates, so I'm just excited for this conversation as you are. And we are, of course, joined by Chris Riddell, an acclaimed British artist and former UK Children's Laureate. He has written and illustrated many books of his own, including Ottoline and the Yellow Cat and Ottoline Goes to School, and he's illustrated for Bloomsbury UK, The Graveyard Book, Coraline, and fortunately, The Milk, as well as The Sleeper and The Spindle. And with him, his constant collaborator, Neil Gaiman, is the author of many highly acclaimed and award-winning books for children and adults. That's right, Neil is the person who has a face. Chris is the person who right now is a drawing, including the New York Times #1 bestselling and Newbery Medal winning novel, The Graveyard Book, the bestselling Coraline, Stardust, and the New York Times bestselling The Sleeper and the Spindle, illustrated by Chris Riddell. He is also the author of 11 picture books, including The Wolves in the Walls, Choose Day, and Cinnamon. A collection of his selected fiction is now available in the Neil Gaiman Reader. Let's give them a round of applause. Well done, everyone. How we doing tonight, gentlemen?
We're good. I have to say, it's just so you know, it's actually not Caroline, it's Coraline.
I am so sorry. I do know that as a giant fan. That will be my one nervous moment of the evening.
I know that you knew that. It's just that you also know that we have 198 people sitting there going, he said Caroline. He said Caroline twice.
Yeah, but Neil, that's a great story. And I think you should tell us that story.
I think you should tell us that story, but real quick, Chris, you have a bit of feedback on your microphone. Just a heads up.
That was amazing feedback, Chris.
It was. I am actually from another planet.
Like serious rock and roll level feedback here. Want to give it another go?
I'm going to say hello again.
Still having that same echo. Is there another? Do you have like maybe headphones you could pop on?
I probably do.
Oh, in the meantime, Neil, do you want to tell us that story he was just referencing?
I probably do. Actually, well, I mean, the thing about Coraline, which the last time I checked was something like the 600th most popular girl's name in America, because they keep giant charts of names and work out the popularity of the top 1,000. It all started out as a typo. Back in the days before we had autocorrect, I was writing a letter to a lady named Caroline and typed Dear Coraline. And I looked at it and thought, that looks like a real name. It looks like it ought to be a real name. And it's such a beautiful name. It's like it's made of something made of coral and something that's sort of partly hidden under the water. And also, if your name was Coraline, everybody would always get it wrong. And they would always call you Caroline. And I could do a whole book about a girl called Coraline. And one of the things that I know immediately is that nobody listens to her and everybody gets her name wrong. And so that actually was the starting point, which teaches an important lesson, which is trust your typos. You know, sometimes you will write things or type things that were not what you meant to write or type, and look at them and see what they are, because they may help. So yes, so Coraline started out as a typographical error. as a transposition of 2 letters, and since then became a book, a film, and, as I say, the 650th most popular name in America.
A typo that became a very real name for many, many very real people. I love that opening, and I'm so glad I made that mistake on purpose, just so that we can make room for that. But Julie, where I really want to start with both of you is, what is it about pirates? Why do we love pirate stories? Chris, I want to hear why you love drawing pirates, because I know this isn't your first pirate book. What is it about pirates? Why do we keep coming back to pirates?
I think that it's something to do with freedom. Because, and I think it's also something to do with the freedom of fictional pirates. I love the way that fictional pirates, in many ways, are more interesting, and certainly more prevalent than the real pirates. You know, in the 1730s, there were pirates out there. You probably didn't want to be taken prisoner by them, and you certainly didn't want to be killed by them. Whereas the pirates, you can like set your own dial for exactly how evil or dangerous or whatever your pirates are. And Chris and I first encountered pirates together in Fortunately the Milk, which is a book by me, and with pictures by Chris. And in it, a father goes out for some milk and is delayed. And one of the reasons why he's delayed is very shortly after being captured by aliens. He, of course, winds up several hundred years ago being taken prisoner by pirates. And we discovered 2 things from this. One of which is I love writing pirates, and the other, which I didn't know, is that Chris loves drawing pirates. So there was much pirate drawage, as you can see.
Now, Neil, I'm just going to test my microphone. How does that sound?
Coming in
Perfect.
clear as day, beautiful.
Excellent. My first experience of drawing pirates was for a book called The Pirate Diary. And that was a strange experience, because I drew pirates with eye patches, pirates with earrings, wooden legs, parrots on their shoulders. And this was a non-fiction book. And the historian who had written it said to me, the pirates you've drawn, eye patches, not really used in the 18th century. That's a myth. He said the earrings, no, not really. That's anachronistic. Maybe 16th century, but not your 18th century pirate. Could you lose those? He said peg legs. That's an invention. Robert Louis Stevenson. They had stumps, possibly a crutch, but no wooden legs. That's Captain Ahab. Can we lose those? No parrots on the shoulder. That's not true at all. Much prefer drawing Neil's pirates. Much better.
A little bit more room for invention.
Oh, of course.
So I mean, the Pirate Stew, which is an entire poem and book about pirates, began during Coraline. It was 2009, the beginning of 2009, and I was in France, in Paris, for the French launch of Coraline, the film. And I was because it was a film company putting me up, I was in a hotel so fancy it felt like you were living inside a cake. And I was in a particularly cakey sort of hotel suite, the kind of hotel suite where, because there's only one of you, it all feels a bit silly because you have lots of rooms and you don't even go into most of them because it's just you, but that's what they bought you. And I woke up from a nap with a few doggerel lines going round in my head. And because I was in a hotel and they had a little pad of paper beside the bed, I wrote them down on the little pad of hotel paper. And it was 8 lines about pirate. It was, we ought to do what pirates do. We ought to make a pirate stew was one of them. And then there was a line about add a figurehead so curvy and some limes to ward off scurvy. And that was all there really was. And I folded it up and I put it in my passport wallet. Because I knew that if I put it in my passport wallet, I would see it every time I got out my passport and I would feel guilty, which is what happened for about the next 9 years. And then it was 2018 and I was working on post-production for the Good Omens television series. I was staying in a hotel in London. I'd get back late in the evening. And I was feeling like I hadn't made anything in a long time. So I started work, just honestly a few lines a night on Pirate Stew. And I thought, I've got this thing. Let's just see where it begins and where it goes. And over the next 2 or 3 weeks, I wrote it, and when I wrote it, once it was done, I did the obvious logical thing that anybody would do upon finishing a monumental and very silly poem about pirates, which is I phoned Chris. And I said, do you have a few minutes? Because if you don't mind, I'd like to read you this thing that I've written. Now, obviously, I had a secret agenda. My secret agenda was that if he liked it, I might be able to lure him into illustrating it. So that was but that was why he was the #1 phone call.
The first person you called. And would you, just before we ask how it felt on Chris's side, would you like to read us a few pages from the book? Here we go.
This book, you mean?
That would be the book, Pirate
Why, yes.
Stew.
Why don't I? Okay, so this is a book called Pirate Stew. Pirate stew, pirate stew, pirate stew for me and you. The night my mum and dad went out, I said, we won't be babysat. They said, you must not grump and pout. We're going out, and that is that. We've planned a quite exciting night. At first, we'll dine by candlelight, then watch a most instructive show in which we'll learn how flowers grow. You have to promise to behave. Then from the hall there came a pitter thump. We know you'll both be brave. Say hello to your babysitter. His hair was grey. His face was scarred. Right leg a peg, left hand a hook. He grinned a grin and said, my card. It read, Long John McRon, ship's cook. My mum and dad said, time to run. Mr. McRon is going to feed you. Long John said, mateys, you have fun, and we will call you if we need you, which we will not. So off they zoomed. My sister whispered, we are doomed. My parents had not been gone long when someone knocked upon the door, and 2 cracked voices raised in song were joined by several voices more. The door was opened, and they came, a pirate crew. They were not tame. Now one was fat and one was thin. One had a hanky on her head. One played upon the violin, 15 bad men upon a dead man's chest, and such like pirate ditties. My sister said, excuse me, when is dinner? Coming soon, my pretties. replied a pirate queen. So then the pirates headed for the fridge and gazed inside with puzzled looks. Some of the pirates scratched their heads. Some of the pirates sucked their hooks. It's difficult to choose, said one. Impossible, began another. Oh, we have to feed them, Long John said. I told their father and their mother, we pirates always keeps our word. At that, each pirate nodded head. And so they thoughtfully conferred. Arrr, beans on toast? No beans, no bread. Or scrambled eggs? Too complicated. Spaghetti. Looks like worms, one said. Old Long John thought. He hesitated. He said, Me hearties, this is true. We ought to do what pirates do. We ought to make a pirate stew. Long John produced an ancient pot. He then produced a wooden spoon. We will serve it piping hot, underneath a pirate's moon. He beat his spoon against the pan, and with one voice they all began shouting out most joyfully, Now we're back home from the sea! Pirate stew, pirate stew, pirate stew for me and you. Pirate stew, eat it and you won't be blue. You can be a pirate too.
Go ahead. Everyone can go nuts in their houses. You can be a pirate too. And obviously the story goes on to many more.
Oh, yes. It's scarcely begun.
From there, exactly.
Wow.
So, Chris, it's 2018, and you get this phone call, and Neil reads this poem. What were your thoughts?
Well, I enjoy it when Neil phones me up, and this was no different. He phoned me up and read me this story, and I thought, pirate babysitters, not terribly commercial, but I'll give it a go. No, I loved it. Absolutely loved it. And then we made our plans, as you do, put the book into a schedule of sorts. And then this extraordinary thing happened to us. We were sort of going along very nicely. And then this extraordinary sort of thing called the coronavirus turned up. And I found myself actually working on this book during what I think we know now as lockdown. And it was the best sort of therapeutic thing to be doing during this extraordinary time. I work at the bottom of my garden. This is my studio. It's an old coach house that's been converted. I put in some skylights and some double doors and a front door to go into. Perfect to work in. And so this is where I did Pirate Stew. While the world was in lockdown, I was happily in my studio working. And so if you detect a certain sort of forensic, manic quality to the artwork, that is the reason. It was a complete displacement activity.
And it worked, it seems. It got you into another world.
It did, and isn't that what fantastic books do for all of us? Particularly that wonderful thing, which is the bedtime story. And Pirate Stew is one of those books that just transports you at bedtime, as a story to read, parent and child. And it's one of those books I think you can sort of dwell over the details and the general sort of cadence, but it's got a lovely sort of lyrical quality. And I love the final payoff at the end. And I saw someone describe it as in terms of an ending, they described it as a chef's kiss of an ending. That sort of lovely gesture that probably the chef at Neil's smart hotel in Paris probably perfected as he delivered Neil's souffle to him in his hotel room. It's a sort of chef's kiss of an ending to this story.
I think that is absolutely true. And let's be honest, you two as collaborators have quite a story yourselves. Neil, like, one, just what was it like working on this book during lockdown from your end of things? But also, how did this kind of collaboration, friendship, relationship that you two have, how did it get started? Y'all have done so many books together now.
It wasn't my idea, and I don't necessarily think it was Chris's. It was our mutual editor at Bloomsbury back in about 2007. I got a phone call from Sarah Adedna, who was the editor back then, who was doing the Graveyard book. And she said, "Do you like Chris's art?" And I said, "Yes, very much so." And she said, "Good, because I'm going to ask him to do the Graveyard book." And I met Chris, I think, for the very first time, actually at the launch party for the Graveyard book. That was where, I mean, it's possible we'd met beforehand, but that's the first time I remember really talking to him about the art. And we'd done, I sent him the manuscript of the book. I'd had one comment through the entire thing, which is, "Can you change the hair color of one character?" which he promptly did. And I thought, "Oh, I like this. He's amenable." And we started working together. That was sort of where it began. And then after that,
I wasn't that aware, Neil, of your work. I only knew you as that author who misspelt their characters' names, which was intriguing. And then Sarah sent me an email mentioning you, and she actually sent the manuscript of the Graveyard book as an attachment. And I clicked on this attachment, and there was the entire text, and I sat and started to read it, and I just thought, I must illustrate this book. I'll actually pay Bloomsbury to illustrate this book. I think they knew this, which is why they had Dave McKean illustrate it. And then I was very much a backup quarterback. I was invited in for the last quarter to sort of do a version. And then at the launch party, when I met Neil, there was Dave, one of my great heroes. And I was prepared to sort of slightly bristle, the way that two tomcats might meet in an alley, and Dave's son came up to me and complimented me on one of my illustrated books. And Dave gave this great big smile. And we looked across at Neil, and Neil had this look of, I'm the guy with two illustrators. He owned the room.
That is beautiful. And now, do we know the count? How many books has it been now?
Lots. Many.
11?
You? I've never stopped to count. But what I love is that there are more books than people even know, because Chris, he also went back and did an edition of Coraline. He did Interworld, which I don't even know if that ever came out in the UK. That may have been like Germany only or something.
It was Germany.
Yes, so he did Interworld in Germany. Beautiful edition. And then there's Sleeper and the Spindle, for which Chris won the Greenaway Award. And the Greenaway Award is as fancy for artists as the Carnegie Medal is for writers. And and as I discovered from Jane Yolen, who has a Caldecott Medal, or who she doesn't have a Caldecott Medal. She is the author of a Caldecott Medal winning book, Al Moon, and I am the author of a Greenaway Medal winning book, being The Sleeper and the Spindle. And Chris, of course, has the medal, and I assume just wears it around Brighton.
All day long. Chris, are you wearing it now?
No, it lives on my mantelpiece, Isaac, and usually about now during the day. So obviously you're in a different time zone, but where I am, it's quite late. And usually at this time of night, what I do is I go over to the mantelpiece, I open this little case and stroke my medal, just quietly when no one knows, no one can see me. And then I just put it back. And don't speak of it again.
Thank you.
John Cheska wears his medals.
I hear this, yes. He has a sort of open-necked look, the sort of Hawaiian shirt with a large sort of medal on a gold chain. Yeah.
Just saying.
Just prominently and beautifully displayed. So, Neil, when you wrote Pirates Stew, obviously, like you said, like it came out, the lyricism's there, the poetry is there. Do you, when you and you have many illustrated works, is it something as a writer that you have the imagery in your head and then you change it when you see the artist's interpretation, or is it something that you try to leave open? And just a little bit about what storytelling and illustration means to you.
Well, I mean, I honestly, I think I could write the driest piece of prose imaginable, one with no conversation or characters, and hand it to Chris, and he would give us back something exciting and thrilling and moving art-wise. So I don't actually. If I think I've got Chris illustrating, I just don't worry about that stuff. But there was also a level on which I knew that I wanted lots of things for Chris to draw. Mm-hmm. I wanted lots of things in the book. If you're doing a book called Pirate Stew, you're going to have a giant list of all of the things that are going to go into the stew. And then Chris is going to have to draw all of the things that goes into the stew. In fact, with where Chris is concerned, I normally, on previous books, I think my contribution to the artwork is normally consists of me going, "It's wonderful. It's really, really good. You're really clever. I wish I could draw like that." And on Pirate Stew, I actually did have a tiny contribution, because in Chris's first sort of pencil breakdown, he just did all the Pirate Stew stuff in one or two giant double-page spreads. And I said, no, can we actually break it down into things that go into the stew, and can we see them all? And I said, just because I think kids reading it at night, adults reading it to kids, that everybody will have fun going from item to another item to another item, and you're just going to see all of the things that go into the stew. And the lovely thing about
particularly the R's, the pirate R's, I like those.
Extra R's for talking.
Very easy to illustrate, obviously.
And there's a line, if it's any consolation, there is one line in there which apparently I put in just to torture the man who would do the audiobook of Pirate Stew, which unfortunately is me. Because there's just, you've got this giant, monstrous, enormous list of all of these things going into the stew, and cannonballs and red bandanas, pineapples and brown bananas, locks from Davy Jones's lockers, blood and thunder, shilling shockers, add a slice of plank for walking, and some extra R's for talking. And then it's all the seashells she sells surely. Pop the lid on most securely. I was like, why would I put that in, knowing that I was going to have to do the audiobook and that parents reading that book to their kids would be cursing me. They'd get to that line and they go, "Oh, I hate you," but I did it anyway.
Can I ask two questions here? One, how many takes did it take for you to get it for the audiobook?
The thing about doing the audiobook that I mostly remember was just doing the whole thing 3 or 4 times. So it wasn't a matter of, can I nail that line? Although it's a very good thing that you can't actually hear any of my original takes of that line or the things that I said when I couldn't get that line down, because they are very, very rude and grumpy indeed. But the fun of it was actually just do the whole thing, because it was sort of like, okay, I'll do a slower read, I'll do a faster read, I'll do a more piratey read, I'll do, here's me Robert Newton voice, and it's and I do love, one of my favorite characters is Sally, who owns the donut shop, who has, I think, because in my head all pirates come from Devon and Cornwall, and in fact Penzance, where the Pirates of Penzance was set, is a beautiful little town, and when you're down in that part of the world, everybody sort of calls you me lover, and they're all very sweet. So I thought that I would give this sort of West Country-ish accent to Sally when I did the book. So she's like, "We are closing for the night," and I love doing Sally, who owns the donut shop.
Well, that is the beauty of a read aloud, right? It's one of my favorite parts of children's books in general, is that you're sharing the story with somebody else, and you are open to do these voices. That was going to be my second thing, is I feel like kids will memorize the seashells line just so that when their parents mess it up, they can yell it at the top of their lungs so perfectly.
Now,
Absolutely.
As an illustrator, Isaac, I don't like to encourage audiobooks. Really, you need the book with the pictures, honestly. Now, I just did a little audit of the books that Neil and I have done together. Graveyard Book was the first one. Coraline was the second one. Interworld, lovely. I hadn't remembered that until now. That's one of my favorites, Neil. Sleeper and the Spindle. Odd and the Frost Giants, which I just love. Fortunately, the Milk. Pirate Stew, of course. Neverwhere, which I really enjoyed. And then that book about frogs Neil hasn't written yet. Just thought I'd throw in there.
You left one out. You left out Art Matters.
Of course, Art Matters. That's sort of a slightly different proposition.
Because that was you created that book.
Well, I created it from this, Neil. Now this is my Neil Gaiman secret portfolio. Bit of an exclusive here. I don't think I've ever shown this to anyone.
Including
and it's
me.
Where I keep wonderful words that I find from Neil. All sorts of things. Here we have the instructions. And I just sort of find these wonderful words and illustrate them for the fun of them. And I love doing this particular one. And my favorite line in this, see if I can find it, is towards the end of this rather wonderful poem. And it's this. And it says, there is a worm at the heart of the tower. That is why it will not stand. Who would have thought? I mean, Neil, you are some sort of seer, I think. You saw this all that time ago. And there's Donald in his tower, and it's not working for him. Very, very prescient.
You drew that a long time ago.
I did. And there are other things in this folio which I'm not at liberty to share with you. But needless to say, they are full of Neil Gaiman gold that I'm sort of going to tantalize Neil with from time to time. And every so often I'll sort of take something out and say, could I illustrate this? And Art Matters was one of those books. And if I may, I'd just like to read this because I think it's a sort of festive thing. And it's a rather jolly little Christmas poem that Neil wrote called Nicholas Was. Nicholas was older than sin, and his beard could grow no whiter. He wanted to die. The dwarfish natives of the Arctic caverns did not speak his language, but conversed in their own twittering tongue, conducted in incomprehensible rituals when they were not actually working in the factories. Once every year, they forced him, sobbing and protesting, into endless night. During the journey, he would stand near every child in the world, leave one of the dwarves' invisible gifts by its bedside. The children slept, frozen in time. He envied Prometheus and Loki and Sisyphus and Judas. His punishment was harsher. Ho, ho, ho. Happy Christmas.
I'm so, again, beautiful words, but what a wonderful moment. Neil, did you know that Chris had the file of yours?
I did not know. I did not know that he had the file. I didn't know that he hadn't. Nicholas was in there. I love that he does. There's and there's weird secret things. I mean, in addition to the book about frogs that I haven't finished writing yet, there's also a thing that was a poem that I wrote for a children's bedtime anthology, and I sent it off to them, and they rejected it on the ground that it would give children nightmares and must not be read to children at night, or perhaps anybody. So I sent it to Chris because I thought, I'll see what Chris says. And Chris sent back about a dozen illustrations. And I suddenly went, oh, maybe this isn't just this little poem. Maybe this is actually something much bigger. So that one's sort of festering away in the back of my head, rotting down, attracting flies and worms and things.
It's in the folio, Neil. Yeah.
Sooner or later, that story will get told.
Well, much like pirates do, it took a little time to brew. It took,
it's weird. I'm okay with these things taking as long as they take. Mm-hmm. Because Pirate Stew, if I'd rushed it, wouldn't have been ready. Wouldn't have. Actually, not even that. It wouldn't have felt like it had a point. What I love about Pirate Stew is it feels like it's about something now. It's not just a silly list of things that you put into stew. It's about families. It's about parents. Like most Neil Gaiman stories, it has kids who are much smarter than the adults and who nobody listens to. Pirate Stew took a little time to brew.
but now it feels complete.
I feel guilty, but that's true.
I want to ask one last question of each of you. It's one question for both of you, and then we're going to open it up to these questions from the audience. Again,
we have 37 questions.
We have so many questions from the audience, and again, if you're an audience member, feel free to drop a question down in there. But to both of you, obviously, this is a history. This is a relationship that's rich in collaboration. What is it about collaborating, either in general or with each other? What is what is the magic that happens when two people start to work on the story, whether visually or written?
Well, for me, I know that I cannot enjoy stuff that I've done. If I wrote it, I'm not going to get any pleasure out of it. But if it's illustrated, I can love it. It's like, suddenly I'm walking around a house that's been built to my designs, and that I'm going, this is even better and weirder than I ever imagined. I got such a thrill out of that Nicholas Was just now. And I loved it. The story, it's very hard to love a story that you wrote 30 years ago as a Christmas card. But watching Chris illustrate it and see it, it felt like I was seeing it for the very first time. So one of the hugest things for me is just the amount of joy that I can get from something by collaborating with somebody, because it's no longer mine, it's ours.
What I really enjoy about our collaborations is that Neil is the worst art director in the world. He just really doesn't bother. He writes these amazing words, gives them to you, and says, over to you. That's your job. And so it's wonderfully permissive. And so that's part of the sort of fun of working with you, Neil, is that you give me the stuff and allow me to go off with you on these amazing adventures, and sort of draw quite basically anything I want, which is just such a brilliant thing for an illustrator.
I love the way that, we get to work on things that stretch you in different ways too. That, the Sleeper and the Spindle artwork was obviously done by the same person who did Fortunately the Milk, but it's a completely different set of skills. It's a different way of drawing. It's a whole new thing. And that for me is an absolute delight. And Chris has actually showed me some sketchbook drawings of his that look nothing at all like I imagine or think of Chris's artwork looking like. The lines look more like Jean Giraud, who drew under the name of Mobius. This beautiful, elegant stuff, and it's like, oh, I didn't know you could do that too. And one day, when life gets a little bit more normal and a little less weird, I would love to be able to just get Chris to send me 12 pictures and write 12 stories to go along with them. And we do a little sort of a calendar of tales. And I think the only thing that I would ask Chris is that all of the drawings look like they come from stories, but just stories that nobody's actually ever written or told.
That sounds like an incredible project. And after the Frog book, I do feel like there's been much mentioned in the Frog book. That sounds fantastic. I also want to say just like what a beautiful answer, and what you're saying about freedom. That's where we're kind of ending where we began, which is that's what we love about Pirate. This idea of freedom, this ability to get out there. Chris, what are these incredible illustrations you're showing at the moment?
Well, this is one of my sketchbooks. So basically, I'm just tantalizing Neil at the moment, just showing him.
I am very easily tantalized.
A sort of range of possibilities of sort of various characters that could appear in this rather cozy, comfortable Christmas picture book for very, very young children.
Oh my gosh, I love this so much. I'm gonna get into these questions here from the audience, Chris, and both of you. I feel like this one is geared towards both of you, which is an audience member noticed that some of the pirates look rather similar between the two books. And Neil, obviously, very famously, many of your worlds are within the same worlds. So is it safe to say that these two pirate books might be?
It's definitely safe to say that when you ask Chris to draw a lot of pirates, he is the kind of person who can say to you, I loved all those pirates in Fortunately the Milk. Would you mind if I brought any of them back? And the answer is, of course not. Please bring them back, but let's have some more. So we got to have those guys, and then we got all sorts of different pirates from different cultures, different places, different and some of them I understand, and then there's one who has something that looks like a coal scuttle on his head, who worries me. I just very disturbing pirate, and I haven't asked Chris why he has a coal scuttle on his head.
This is a little piece from Fortunately the Milk that the publishers added. I don't know who suggested this, but it just says, Chris Riddell, the artist, is a very mysterious and secretive person. When we asked him how he imagines the peculiar things that Mr. Gaiman asks him to draw, he told us he had no imagination whatsoever, but he was fortunate in having excellent models and in drawing all his characters from life. He then sent us the following drawings of his models for the story you've just read. Having looked at these drawings, we found ourselves with several unanswered questions. How did Mr. Riddell know the names of the various characters he had drawn? And for that matter, how would it be possible to draw ancient pirates, future ponies, galactic space police, dinosaurs, without access to a time machine of his own? We wrote to Mr. Riddell asking him these questions, but our letter was returned with the words, "Gone away," written on it in something that appeared to be fish paste. I think that answers that question.
Oh, 100% answers that question for sure. One question here for you, Neil, and though I would be interested, Chris, also to hear for you different types of drawing styles, like Neil was just talking about. But do you sit down to intentionally write a children's book versus a YA book versus an adult novel, or do you start with a general idea and follow where it takes you?
I start with the general idea, but I'm always prepared to be proved wrong. The time it got trickiest was writing The Ocean at the End of the Lane, because I was halfway through that book and realized that it definitely wasn't a children's book. But I had to sort of figure out why it wasn't a children's book, because it's a book with a 7-year-old protagonist and magic. And it's a book I probably would have loved when I was 10. But I was also going, but this really is an adult book. The Mysterious Frog book, which Chris is waiting for, is one where I'm one of the holdups on the book, which I've written part of, is figuring out who it's for, because it's sort of 50% about frogs in Central Park, and it seems to be 50% about librarians in New York Public Library, and it's trying to figure out, okay, well, I understand the audience for funny frogs, but I need to make sure that the librarians are actually still librarians, but work as, it's obviously not a Roald Dahl book because it has librarians and frogs in, and so I don't know. You figure it out. You write. Mostly, I just write the book. When I wrote Coraline, everybody I showed it to was convinced that nobody was going to let me publish it as a children's book. And I was incredibly lucky. Even my agent, the redoubtable Marilee Heifetz, I sent her the book, and she phoned me up and she said, it's great, but obviously I can't, we're not going to publish it as a children's book. And I said, but it is a children's book. And she said, well, I don't think so. And I said, look, you have 2 kids. They're 5 and 7. Read your girls Coraline. And if they are crippled and traumatized by it, obviously I will pay for their therapy. And otherwise, we'll do the book. And she phoned me up a week later and she said they loved it. They weren't scared. They weren't upset. They just loved the book. And we're going to do it as a children's book. And I said, I'm so glad. And then there's a little sort of PS, a tiny postscript to that about 8 years later at the New York premiere of a Coraline musical. And I was sitting next to Morgan, who was the one who had been 15. She had been 5 and now she was, I don't know, 15, 16. And I said, this is all because of you. Because if it's when your mom, do you remember when your mom read you Coraline? It's because you weren't scared that she went and it's been a children's book. And she said, I was terrified. But I wasn't going to tell anybody because I had to find out how it ended. So Morgan De Fiore lied and the world got Coraline.
The world got that is a beautiful story. And Chris, for yourself, when you're choosing a type of like a direction, obviously your style is very much your own, but you know how to create art in all these different kind of forms.
Well, I was wondering that maybe Neil's Frog book could have a typo. It could start a whole new thing. Cormit the Frog, from the author of Coraline. I was terrified by Coraline as well. And then an illustrator friend of mine posted something up at Halloween, and she had made herself a pair of button-eyed sunglasses that were so spooky, simple and yet spooky, which I think should be merchandised in some way, Neil, I'm just saying. I
disagree.
So, yeah, I don't know, Isaac. I think it is just about encountering great stories, adding pictures to them, creating these extraordinary things that we call books that enter our imaginations and become real for us. And I'm sure I'm not alone in this, and I think Neil probably has this, that sometimes when we write about characters and we draw characters, they take on a life of their own and they sort of become real for us. And then you have this lovely sense of sharing with readers who inhabit those worlds as well. And there's nothing more heartwarming and yet terrifying than when you meet an 8-year-old reader who tells you made a spelling mistake on page 243, as if it's your personal responsibility, and that you really shouldn't have done that thing to that character in chapter 12. So the inscrutability of the very young is just one of the hazards we face.
Yeah, but it makes it beautiful and fun as well. This is going to be the last question I believe that we have time for. And Chris, I'm actually going to ask for you to bring the camera off of your beautiful hands and up your beautiful face.
That's a big ask, given that the poster picture is very, very out of date. So
you've already given so much.
This is what lockdown has done to me. And I'm here, as if from mission control.
We get to see the man behind the hands, and this is the final question, which it's a swing here. It's the top voted question. It comes to us from John Sheska, a wonderful author who's obviously in the audience tonight, and he said, "Neil, would you and Chris please sing that one sea shanty that you always do?"
Well, of course we will.
It's
But
lovely.
Isaac, I think, as the moderator, you should give us the first line. Just hit it.
Wait, I don't know where that line is.
Oh, we should ask John Cheska.
John,
Maybe John could sing it for us.
let's see here.
I mean, it is filthy, isn't
Probably.
it?
I mean,
Neil? Yeah.
the traditional one, of course, is what shall we do with the drunken Cheska? What shall we do with the drunken Cheska? What shall we do with the drunken Cheska? Early in the morning.
We should leave out the cucumber verse.
We're not
That's
doing the
just not
cucumber verse.
appropriate.
Or the hedgehog verse.
Tie him up with a stinky cheese man. Tie him up with a stinky cheese man. Tie him up.
I am up with a stinky cheese man, early in the morning. There we go. Top voted. We love it.
He's done it again. All right. So because that was not a very long song, one last quick question from the second most voted question, which was, what is a pirate story, be it a children's book or a novel or a movie or just a pirate story that stuck with you, one of your favorite pirate stories?
For me, Treasure Island. I remember reading it as a kid, and really what I loved about Treasure Island is I didn't take away a whole plot and adventure. It all fragmented immediately after I'd finished it in my head into Ben Gunn marooned on the island, into Long John Silver with his one leg, into all of this kind of stuff where I couldn't have told you the plot, but I had all of the ingredients. It sort of deconstructed itself as it went. So there were pirate maps, and pirates obviously take over the ship, and there's buried treasure.
Gum's love of cheese, since we hit on the stinky cheese guy. But I love that. But for me, what sticks in my imagination are N.C. Wyeth's beautiful paintings of pirates of all sorts, but also the ones he did to Treasure Island. One of the great illustrators.
I have N.C. Wyeth was a genius, and one of the lovely things about being out here on the island of Skye is every now and again you get N.C. Wyeth skies up there. The clouds go these colors that I thought that only N.C. Wyeth ever did, but apparently God does them too. And also Mervyn Peake. Mervyn Peake did an edition of Treasure Island in the 40s that is really kind of haunting, and it's the complete opposite of Wyeth, because Wyeth is this amazing paintings as if the story of Treasure Island was going on, and Wyeth just sort of set up his easel and painted everybody. But Peake, you get the impression he actually was just one of the pirates, but he was a pirate kind of like Chris, with a pen and a little notebook, and every now and then he just sort of sketched whatever he saw.
Well, I'm very happy that you two sketched and wrote and told this story. Again, the last time, everyone in the audience, please give yourselves a round of applause. Thank you, thank you, thank you. The book is Pirate Stew. Neil, Chris, this was such a wonderful evening. Thank you for sharing with us. And Chris, I know you've been drawing a lot of Neils throughout the virtual tour, so I look forward to your book of Neils. Hopefully coming out at some point. Gentlemen, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Have a good night, everybody.